make emotions work for you instead of against you. Before you say anything, you have to ask yourself 3 questions. Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by me? And does this need to be said by me now?
Will I regret not saying this? That's a great question for people who probably might spend too much time in that pause and in their own head. Blind spots are called blind for a reason. And it's how do you close that gap?
Clear writing equals clear thinking and vice versa.
Feedback, they say, is the oxygen of champions.
I have a tool that I like to call be a diamond cutter. Be a diamond cutter. And the whole thinking behind this is none of us likes to hear criticism. But then what can a professional diamond cutter do? He or she can cut it, work it, polish it. In the end, you have something beautiful, something very valuable.
Justin, I am delighted to welcome you to an episode of Stratospheric Leaders. I first came across you when someone gave me your book, EQ Applied, and I only have to look inside the book. We can see it scribbled, I've written in the margins, and this book is packed with, what is so interesting, it's packed with so many practical lessons, insights, frameworks. It is a book that I give to all my clients, and it's one that I've reread many times over. So thank you, first of all, for putting this into the world.
Well, thank you, Georgie. That means a lot to me because, as you know, since we've met and gotten to know each other, I've just gained so much respect for you. We're always talking about the deep conversations we have, the thoughtful questions you have. You really make me think. So that really means a lot coming from you.
Oh, thank you. Well, look, EQ Applied, emotional intelligence. I mean, many people will be familiar with IQ. I'm sure many people are familiar with the term EQ as well. But emotional intelligence might mean different things to different people. So you are a recognized leader, thought leader in emotional intelligence. What does it mean?
Okay, so I have 2 definitions that I share. And the very basic one is emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage emotions. So it's all about understanding how emotions affect us and our decision making, how emotions affect others, and then being able to actually do something about it. But then the second definition I use is very practical, and it's make emotions work for you instead of against you. And hopefully that's self-explanatory, but to just kind of add context to that, we're humans, we're emotional creatures. That's a good thing. No one wants to be a robot. No one wants to work with or for a robot, but emotions can also get us into trouble sometimes. So it's all about just finding that balance between emotions and rational thought. It's not taking emotions out of the equation, which a lot of people say that to me. It's like, oh, emotional intelligence is taking emotions out. No, not at all. We need those emotions. It's just finding that balance with emotions so that emotions are causing you to do things, to make decisions, to say things that you're proud of later, as opposed to saying things or doing things that make you cringe later and you regret. And I wish I had handled that differently.
I love that, making your emotions work for you and against you. So as I'm listening to you, it's not about stripping out emotions, and we've got a lot of emotions. Let's embrace them. But how do we make them work for us? And what drew you to emotional intelligence? I'd love to hear how it all started.
Sure. So funnily enough, I'd say I only learned the term maybe about a decade ago. So I'll condense a very long story short. I worked over a decade for a nonprofit in New York, and brilliant experience. I gained so much. I got amazing training. I had amazing mentors that really taught me what I didn't know at the time was emotional intelligence. And then I moved to Germany. My wife is from here. So you have an American guy living in Germany, and I was working mostly with German executives, coaching and consulting. And I was working a lot with helping them with emotional intelligence, but not knowing that's what it's called at the time. I was just helping them with their communication skills, with management skills. And then when I started writing for Inc. magazine, I got a column, and I was really given, with some guidance, an amazing editor named Laura Lorber. She gave me some guidance, but I was almost given carte blanche to explore different areas of management and that kind of thing. And so as I was writing advice that I knew worked from my own experience and from helping others, I was looking for scientific research to back it up. And I kept coming across this term, emotional intelligence, like, oh, okay, this is what this is known as. And then the next step was I noticed there was kind of a gap in the literature because there was a lot of writing on emotional intelligence, but much of it was theoretical or was written very academic. And so I found as I wrote about the very practical side of it, hey, this is what this looks like in real life. hey, here's an example of this. Here's how you develop it. Here's how you practice it. I kind of filled this gap in the niche without even meaning to. And that became then my calling card. And, more and more people were reading. That became an audience. That became a book. That became the pivot for my entire business. And here we are today.
And I love that, your calling card. And what you said there, I think it's really important. Like, this is what it looks like. So your book and what you speak about, yes, there's theory, but like, this is what it looks like in action. And let me show you how to work, make emotions work for you rather than against you. And I think, often people want to know the how, and there's some theories out there that give you the concept, but people want to know, well, how do I make, give me the insights.
Exactly. So one, I'm sure we'll get into more of this later, but just to illustrate that for those who are listening, everyone tells us, and we learn at an early age, to think before we speak, right? Think before you speak. I teach my children that. I'm sure you teach your children that. But no one, or at least many of us, we don't teach the children how to think before you speak. And so like a very, very simple tool that I don't take credit for, I learned it from a stand-up comedian, television personality, Craig Ferguson. Some will know him. And he said in a stand-up routine years ago, before you say anything, you have to ask yourself 3 questions. Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by me? And does this need to be said by me now? I know you know this well because we've talked about it before, but I literally use that question almost every single day of my life. I use it at work. I use it at home with my family. And many times you'll be surprised how hard it is to get through all 3 questions. But just having that little structure, for whatever reason, it works better than just think before you speak. Because think before you speak, I think it's, I don't know, it's just not enough for us. And it's really hard to develop that habit. When okay, I'm going to ask myself these 3 questions before I say something, then it gives you this little structure, you get used to it, and then it causes you, or it teaches you, to think before you speak.
As you were speaking there, the Navy SEALs quote came up for me, like, slow is steady is fast. And there's something there about power in the pause. And that pause might be 3 seconds. Like, we're not talking about a minute or 2 minutes, but those 3 questions: does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by me? Does this need to be said by me now? You and I both work with a lot of executives where sometimes, people are interrupting, emotions are driving the conversations. Those 3 questions bring such intentionality and consciousness and awareness, I think, around what we're saying, why we're saying it. It's slowing things down to being more purposeful.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, it's so much intentionality because there's so many applications to it. It can be a leader leading a meeting that tends to speak first. And it's not necessarily that he or she is saying something they're going to later regret, but they're stifling the conversation. They're stifling ideas. They're not inviting their other people to speak first. So, that's another application for it. And there's just so many applications. And then for others, say, okay, maybe those 3 questions are not right. If you are the type of person that finds it hard to speak up and second guess yourself, then you need a different question. And for you, the question might be, will I regret not saying this? Oh. And then asking yourself that in the moment can give you kind of the motivation, the impetus to speak up and say something that actually does really need to be said right now.
That's a really good question. I work with a lot of female leaders, and there are a number of them that don't, our voice is our biggest asset. And actually there are sometimes they have the great idea, the great thought, but because there can be a theme of perfectionism, there's like, okay, but is it fully formed? And so they're in their own head.
Right.
And then someone else says it. And you're like, damn it, that was what I was going to say. So will I regret not saying this? That's a great question for people who probably might spend too much time in that pause and in their own head.
Exactly.
And what you also shared there around leaders, if they speak to, they interject too quickly without giving it thought, that it can stifle. And I think there are always, second, third order consequences, a ripple, isn't there, to everything we say. So it's that does this need to be said? Does this need to be said by me? Does this need to be said by me now? It's really giving thought to what that ripple could be if you are saying something in the moment.
Exactly. Because sometimes you get through the first 2 questions and it's just about the timing. Is this really the right place, context? Are the right people in the room that I need to say this? Should it be a one-to-one conversation that I say this? And just then that 3rd question just helps you to realize this definitely needs to be said by me, but it's not exactly the right time. Let me do this in an hour or tomorrow or whenever it is. And then, finding that balance and again, not losing track of it. Maybe it means scheduling it in your calendar right then so you don't forget to do it because it is a conversation that needs to be had. But going back to what you said, George, it's all about being intentional with how you're speaking and acting.
I think the same also applies to emails. I've got several clients that they'll sit on an email, they'll write it, type it when they're in their emotion, but then they'll leave it, they'll give it air to breathe, to then go back to ask themselves probably those similar questions, because once those words are out in the world, you can't pull them back, and words could be evergreen.
So true. So true. I've done that myself, actually. And that's part of the reason why I developed these tools, was to help me in those emotional moments. And then I started sharing them because they helped me so much. I wanted to share them with others.
Well, I said, and those 3 questions for those listening, they are such incredible questions. And many of my clients, and I always credit you, Justin, many of my clients use those questions. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, Justin, what do you think makes it such a powerful force in leadership in today's world specifically?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things. It's how it affects us, how others' perceptions we may not be aware of. So we talk about emotional intelligence being broken down into 4 main domains or elements. Self-awareness, so how much we understand ourselves and how we're being perceived by others. Self-management, actually being able to do something about that and kind of rein our emotions in, or to inspire ourselves to actually, like we said a minute ago, to actually speak up. So sometimes it's using those emotions to actually get us to do something. Then there's social awareness, so understanding others and how emotions are affecting them and the decisions they're making and their communication style. If they're having a bad day, something going on in their personal life that's causing them to act differently than from what I'm used to or from what I'm expecting. And then relationship management is kind of combining all of those to being able to, I describe it as produce positive benefits from your relationships, which sounds kind of vague at first, but we all think of those relationships where we come across someone and we cringe. Oh, I don't want to deal with that person right now. No, that's not the effect we want. We want to have positive relationships with others. And so if you think about that, it affects so many areas of our life. Emotions, like we said, we're emotional creatures, so they underpin every decision that we make. They affect how we say things. They affect how others perceive how we say things, which sometimes are very, very different, opposite ends of the spectrum almost. And so I like to say emotional intelligence is almost everything, and almost everything is emotional intelligence. Not to overestimate its importance, but just really showing that emotions affect almost everything that we say and do and hear from others. And so just keeping that in mind can really help us to see how much of an effect it has in our everyday life. And again, at home and at work.
And you mentioned there it starts with self-awareness. And I strongly believe all good leadership starts with self-leadership, which is really about understanding ourselves from the inside out. And the perception piece you mentioned is also about understanding ourselves from the outside in. What is the experience, that people have of working with us or connecting with us? And that perception gap can sometimes be Grand Canyon wide, and when I do 360 feedback with clients that I work with, it's really interesting. Blind spots are called blind for a reason. And it's how do you close that gap? I mean, how perceptive do you think human beings are generally?
Oh, not at all. Even the ones that are relatively good at it. Like, I work at this all the time. I eat, sleep, and breathe emotional intelligence. My family is tired of hearing me talk about it. But even with that, I'm surprised at sometimes the gap that I have, where something that I say lands completely the wrong way. Because I don't know the other person well enough, or I misjudge the other person, and I think that they're not to label them as a type or a box, but I think they're going to perceive something one way and they perceive it a completely different way. And that was it took me a long time, not just to learn that, to be able to clarify that for myself. That's one reason why I love to write. As you know, clear writing equals clear thinking and vice versa. And I always thought about, even when I wrote the book, I don't think I hit this point hard enough. I talk about self-awareness and being how emotions affect us and understanding how emotions affect us. And I didn't talk enough about how others perceive you, because at first well, that's not self, that's others. No, but we lack awareness in ourselves, which is why we don't see how the other person understands or is interpreting the things that we say.
I remember in lockdown, I watched I think it's called The Last Dance. I think it's called The Last Dance. And it was
Oh
about
yeah,
Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls.
big
And
basketball fan. So
okay, so and the interviewer spoke to, and I'm going to forget the names of the very famous players, but what was it like working, playing
oh yeah,
alongside Michael Jordan? And they're like bully, abrasive, aggressive, all the words you probably wouldn't want to be described as. And they shared, I don't know if you remember the scene, they shared it with Michael. And clearly they had this, this was, he hadn't been prepared for what was coming. And he was genuinely taken aback because he said, but I didn't ask them to do anything I wouldn't have done myself. And I wanted them all to be a winner, but they didn't know his intent.
right, right.
And
Yeah,
that perception piece was
sorry.
was very much in that really for me illustrated where that was a big perception gap.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example in building self-awareness and again acting with intention. Now, Michael Jordan may go back and say, and I think he may have even said this in the documentary, that he wouldn't change anything because his goal was to win and that led to winning.
Yeah.
But we're all different, right? And we may not want to, I like to use this question, what will it cost? We may not want to win or achieve our goals at the cost of other people seeing us that way. And if that's the case, then understanding that, knowing that at a much earlier stage, maybe we're still able to achieve those goals a different way or with tweaking or adjusting. Like you said, even him just making his intent more well known, a pat on the back, like, hey, this is why I'm doing this,
Yeah.
that could just be enough to close that gap between, okay, this is tough love, we're all after the same thing versus, oh man, I hated working with that guy.
Yeah. It's interesting. I once worked with a leader and we were doing a 360 and he said, I don't have any blind spots. And I was like, interesting, because blind spots are blind for a reason, but it goes back to
Exactly.
that piece you mentioned about self-awareness and our willingness to really hold the mirror up to see ourselves. And we have to be willing and I suppose open to seeing ourselves as well.
Big time. And that's not the first leader that said that, and it won't be the last. But as you well know, Georgie, all of us have them. All of us have them. And to ignore that or to not be able to accept that is already a huge weakness. Because if that probably means he or she is unable to take constructive feedback, or let's just call a spade, criticism. Sometimes we need criticism. And people like that are often not able to take that, or at least not take it well.
I'd love to pivot there because feedback, if I look in the world of sports, feedback, they say, is the oxygen of champions. And if you're, let's say, a soccer player or we talk about basketball, you have feedback from the referee, the spectators, the coach, your teammates, the opposition. Feedback is coming at you from many, many different directions. And yet not everyone is great at taking feedback. And I see this in and it's in the leadership space as well. So what's one technique you would use to coach someone who struggles with taking feedback?
Definitely. So let me just, you mentioned referees, and I've never had this thought before until you just said this. We look at professional athletes. It's already something to be able to take feedback from your teammates and from coaches. Not all are able to do that well, right? And the better ones are. But now it made me think, how many cannot take feedback from the referee? Because the whole thing about that is if they disagree, what happens? Often their emotions get into it. We see superstar players that may be coachable, but they can't take that feedback for the referee and they can't adjust to the way the referee is reffing the game. And it may cause them to lose the game because they can't make that adjustment in the moment to see, okay, this referee is refereeing it this way. I need to change slightly how I play. Otherwise, the calls are going to keep going against me, and that may cause us to lose the game because you're looking for every advantage, right? So I love that thought. Thank you for mentioning that because I've never thought about that before. And then going back to the question, so what tool? So I have a tool that I like to call be a diamond cutter. Be a diamond cutter. And the whole thinking behind this is none of us likes to hear criticism. Even if we're the most healthy individual that can take criticism well, in the moment, we hate to hear it. Why? Because our emotions are attached to what we say, what we do, the work we've put in. So for someone to tell us it's not quite right, it stings, it hurts. And we compare this to a roughly mined diamond. Diamond doesn't look good when somebody finds it in a rough. It's cruddy, it's rocky, you probably don't see much shiny to it. But then what can a professional diamond cutter do? He or she can cut it, work it, polish it. In the end, you have something beautiful, something very valuable. So you have to be a diamond cutter, because when you hear that criticism, when you hear that feedback, it's not going to feel good in the moment. You're going to think, oh, this is ugly. I hate it. I don't want to listen to this. But the people that are able to cut, polish, make it look nice, and we use 2 questions to do that. If I were to take my emotions out of the situation or bring my emotions into balance, what's one thing I can take or learn from this feedback? And then second, okay, now how can I use that to make my work better, to clarify my communication? Because sometimes I would venture to say 70 to 80% there's some truth in that criticism. Even if it's not said or delivered well, there's some truth in it that you can learn something from. But for those, let's say 10, 20%, whatever, there's no truth in it, it's just a troll, whatever, it still helps you to understand how some people are receiving your message. And so that may still allow you to clarify the message. Now, we're not saying to entertain trolls and that all criticism needs to be entertained. No. But most of the time it does. And most of the time you can learn something from it, even if the criticism comes from a bad place, even if it's 100% not right, you can still oftentimes learn something from it that can make your work better.
Yeah, I often, speak about, feedback not being eternal judgment, because, not everyone's is a great feedback giver, but it's not a eternal judgment. And to your point, there's always going to be a seed of truth, even if and often the feedback, and I love what you said there, if I take my emotions out, what is one thing I can learn? Because that's it's removing ourselves from the situation. I know when I was in the corporate world, and if someone said, Georgie, I want to give you some feedback, already my emotions have been triggered. I'm like, I'm going to get fired. What if I done wrong? I'm in my own head. I'm not being the rational, logical version of myself. And so if I take my emotions out, what is one thing I can learn? And how can I use that to make me better? And I suppose feedback, to your point, is it's giving us insight into the perception of us, because even if it's not true, fully or 100% true, there is a perception of us that piece of feedback is being experienced by others.
Exactly. And I love the experience you just shared, because it shows that receiving and giving feedback is 2 completely different things. Mm-hmm. You were a very emotionally strong and healthy individual, that you were able to cut those diamonds when you were receiving that feedback, even though it hurt at first. And as soon as you heard that word feedback, it kind of triggered you emotionally, yeah. Right? So now we have to remember, if we're the ones giving that feedback, not everyone's going to be able to do that. And even the ones that are still going to get triggered in the moment. Yeah. So how can we frame our feedback in a different way? Maybe we don't say that at all. Can I share some feedback with you? Because we know how that's going to affect 90% of the people that we speak to. Instead, we have this mentality of, how can I help? That's what's going on in our mind. Not that how can we give feedback? How can I help this person? And then we frame the conversation completely differently. If it's feedback on a presentation, for example, hey, great job on that presentation. If there was some moment of greatness in there, we don't want to give false praise, right? If there wasn't at all, like, hey, I want to thank you for that presentation you gave yesterday.
Okay.
Can I ask you, how did you feel about it? And now, okay, how perceptive the person is, maybe they still kind of tell what's coming, but it can lower their guard, and giving them the chance to speak first. Maybe they know, oh my goodness, I struggled so much with it. I hated how it came out. That already puts the conversation in a better place. And then, we have more tools of how to guide that conversation, sharing experiences about things that we did, that we hated about presentations in the past, where we really, we really had a major fail. That can then lower the guard more. Oh, there's vulnerability there. They can relate to it. Asking them permission. Can I share one thing that I wish somebody had shared with me long ago? Asking them permission. Now they're feeling more in control of the situation. And now you've completely changed how you give feedback that makes it much more easy to palate, and something that someone may actually take and apply in their work.
And interesting what you shared there is the how you do it, because it could be the same message, but the delivery could be two very different deliveries, and how it's received. One is could be very open and receptive. The other could be more, I'm triggered. And it's interesting when I was listening to your tools there, because my children at school were taught, and I've shared this with clients, the WWWEBI, what went well, and then EBI, even better if. So it's always trying to find, there's something, even if it's something small, something that you can give praise to. WWW, what went well, but the EBI, even better if, because it's how do you make it growth orientated? Because we're all human beings, we're all evolving. And one of the things that came up for me when I was sharing with you about, when someone says, Georgie, can I give you some feedback? I could go into my own head, and I think of that as emotional hijacking. And we'll all have moments where we're emotionally hijacked. Someone cuts us up in the car. My children can lead me to being, when they don't put stuff in the dishwasher, that can, I can get emotionally hijacked then. But how do you advise people to self-regulate in that moment? Because our emotions aren't always helpful.
Right. So the first thing to say is you can't. You can't self-regulate in that moment at the beginning. You can over time. And so what I really recommend is, because we're not used to doing that, the reason why our emotions get hijacked, well, besides the fact that, going into the scientific explanation of the amygdala kind of overdriving those other more rational parts of our brain, in addition to that, we've built habits that we've done over and over for sometimes at least months, more times years. Like someone cuts you off on the highway, you probably react the same way every time. And so that's why you react that way now.
Yeah.
So it starts with recognizing what you've done that you wish you had done differently.
Okay.
And so asking yourself, we have a tool that we call the emotional postmortem. So after you have said or done something that you regret, take time later that day, the next day, take 15 to 20 minutes and journal about it. Ask yourself, why did I do that action? What led to it? What things do I have control over that I could change in the future? What things don't I have control over? And how can I deal with those things? Now, you do that after 1, 2, 3 times, it's not going to have much effect. I'll be honest with you. You do that 5, 6, 7, 8 times, and eventually now it's still helpful to write it down, but even you might be surprised how many emotional hijacks we have in the course of a day or a week or a month. And now you don't always have to write them down, but you're constantly thinking, I wish I didn't handle that way. What could I do differently? Now, over the course of months, maybe even as early as weeks, and definitely years, you're slowly changing your reaction. You're changing that habitual response. You're actually changing how your amygdala responds in those situations, and you're not feeling hijacked to the same degree, which allows you to actually control your responses better.
And that habitual response, it takes time, doesn't it? I mean, often people want a quick fix. They want to have a tool, and then, within 24 hours. And that habitual response, that's taken for many people years, decades. It's so entrenched. And that journaling or even just asking ourselves the questions, why did I react that way? It goes back to what you were sharing earlier about that self-awareness. It's bringing insight. It's putting attention on things. And so it is about that emotional post-mortem, unpacking it to understand what was the trigger. And a question you won't share with me, which I loved, are my reactions helping or harming me? Because, if they're harming us and others, that's not helpful.
Exactly. Yeah, and like you said, it takes time for these tools to work. You will see some immediate changes, I think, when you apply some more than others. But like something like this, it takes time. But what's the right word? I don't want to say underestimate. Let's put it this way. The sooner you get started, the sooner you're going to see big changes. It just, how it is, like even raising kids, right? Who we all say the same cliche, they grow up so fast. Well, yeah, to us they do, but that is the same long process for every child. It was the same process for us growing up. And it's the same thing with these tools. Yes, it seems, it's so much, it takes so much time. But if you start today, in 1 month from now, you're going to be much better than you were a month ago. In 6 months from now, in a year from now, in 5 years from now, you will look back and say, oh my goodness, what was I doing back then? I'm a completely different person. And so I say, just start using them and start
Yeah.
practicing, and you're going to see those changes over time.
I can't remember what the proverb is, but it was about the best time to plant a tree was like 15 years ago, but the second best
Mm,
time is today.
I love it.
Because if you haven't done it 15 years, and I'm paraphrasing, but it is the point of, change starts now. It takes time, but it's about that incrementalism, isn't it? Every time you're spending time reflecting, you're building awareness, you're bolstering that muscle.
Exactly. I had the privilege of having, I don't know if you know Anne-Laure Lecomte. She's a newly minted neuroscientist. She's the author of a relatively new book, Tiny Experiments. And we had the chance to interview her inside my community recently. And one of the concepts she talks a lot about in the book, and that really resonated with our people, was time anxiety. And it's exactly what you mentioned right now, just feeling like, oh, it's too late for me to start this. Everyone else that is successful at this did this already or has done this already, has been working at this for years. But like you said, many times we're wrong about that, number one, because many people that end up being successful got a much later start than you thought.
Yeah.
And then, just like you said, second best time is today. If you start today, you'll be surprised at the advancement you can make in a relatively short period of time.
And it doesn't have to be a big direct debit of time, does it? Reflection doesn't, we don't need to spend an hour journaling. Even if it was a minute or 5 minutes, that is still going to be transformative over time.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the one biggest, I might be jumping the gun a little bit because we've talked about this in the past, but we've talked about what's one practice that people can do that will immediately have effects on their emotional intelligence. And that one practice for me is journaling. Because again, going back to clear writing, clear thinking, doesn't have to be long, 5, 10, 15 minutes in the morning. And if you're not sure where to start, ask yourself that question. What's a recent time where my emotions worked against me? In contrast, what's a recent time when my emotions worked for me? Because then we see what you're starting to do is you're starting to identify, go back to self-awareness, right? You're starting to identify your strengths that you can continue to leverage. If something worked for you, you need to lean into that and do more of that. If something worked against you, that's something that needs to be addressed. And you have to ask yourself, okay, what led to that? Why? What can I change? What can I avoid? What do I need to embrace? What are the difficult conversations I need to have with myself or with others to address this challenge, this problem? But I think journaling is the single best thing. And again, not all of us are writers. This doesn't come easy for all of us. Start small. Start with one question, 5 minutes. Everyone can do 5 minutes. And I promise you're going to see results if you do that consistently.
Yeah, I've been journaling for probably 10, 15 years. And I have to say it's been transformative. And sometimes I don't even know what I'm going to write. So I'll write on my notebook. I'm not sure what I'm going to write today. And I'll just see where it goes. And what I really had to learn as a recovering perfectionist, what I had to learn with journaling is it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. It doesn't matter if it doesn't make perfect sense. It's just to let that pen keep going and to go with flow and then go back and reflect on what you've written. And there's no right or wrong. You can't get it wrong. It's just about getting started.
Exactly. And there's another technique for those who are listening. Again, if you don't have the questions, and you can find questions online, right? You and me, we offer questions like to our clients that they can use. But if you don't know where to start by transcribing. Find someone, think of a goal, something you're trying to work on, something you're trying to get better at. Find someone that you know online, an author, someone that you follow on social media that is good at this thing, and just start transcribing what they are saying. Because when you do that, I call this my cheat code. In movies, they have these movies, sci-fi movies, where you plug into a computer and you can download information, and now all of a sudden you can speak a language or you have a skill. Well, it doesn't work 100% like that, but it's as close as you can get in real life, because as you start transcribing things that others are saying that have already achieved goals that you want, you start to emulate the thinking that gets you to those goals, and you will find that it actually changes your thinking. So that's another technique you can use in journaling, is just start transcribing. And this is a different use case, but we're in industry, we're allowed to do this. People that start copywriting, advertising, they are trained to copy the best advertisements in history, advertisements from Apple, advertisements from Gary Halbert. And why do they do that? Because as they start copying those advertisements, not that they will say the exact same words, but it trains them to think differently and to develop this skill. So that's another technique
I
listeners
love
can
that.
use.
I love that. And also it's looking at people who've achieved the goals you want. How do they think? That there's something there about educating yourself on how they think. The technique when I first started journaling, and it was the 3 times 5 minutes. And it was, I journal for 5 minutes. I'd then spend 5 minutes reflecting what I'd written, and I'd underline or highlight words that stood out. Then I'd do another 5 minutes going deeper on the words or the sentences that I'd underlined. Because it was really interesting. When I read back my words, I'm like, well, that's interesting. Or that sentence is worthy of exploration. And that was like a 15-minute exercise that I found very, very valuable. And when you shared earlier on around in that reflection, you talked about people understanding their strengths. My son's got a rugby podcast, and he speaks to a lot of rugby international players, and they talk about how do you make your strengths super strengths? Because often we focus on the areas we want to develop, which is important if those areas are necessary. But what if we can make our strengths super strengths? And that piece, I was like, wow, I was, certainly when I grew up in the corporate world, it was, most of the feedback was spent looking at the developmental areas and the strengths for the strengths. But what are the marginal gains if you can, exercise those more, even by like 1%?
I love that. I'm making notes here too. I wrote down WWWEBI, by the way. And I'm writing this one down too, because just having these short phrases, maxims make a big difference in being able to apply this. So turn strengths into super strengths. I love that, because we all know that deep down that if we can leverage those strengths and we can make them even stronger, that's going to benefit us. But just that short maxim, turn strengths into super strengths, I think that can go a long way with actually clarifying that this is something we need to do and keeping it top of mind. Let me keep doing this. I love it.
And when we think about strengths, there's a number of leaders I've worked with before and also worked for where, one of their strengths is empathy. And I think every strength, yes, it's about making it a super strength, but every strength, if it's overextended, there can be a shadow side to that. So if we think about empathy being, part of emotional intelligence, what is an effective way for leaders to practice empathy, but without overextending themselves?
Definitely. So first of all of us, land different places on the empathy spectrum, as we like to call it. Some of us are very naturally empathetic. Some of us really struggle with showing empathy for others. And there's actually pros and cons to both that. Just because you lack empathy doesn't mean it's always going to be a weakness for you. There's situations where that's going to be helpful for you. But what I like to describe it is emotionally intelligent empathy, because wherever you land on that spectrum, you have to find a way to keep it in balance. So for someone like myself, I'm a very highly agreeable person. It causes me emotional stress to disagree with someone, to say no to someone. It doesn't mean I can't do it, but it's more stressful for me than someone who's very low on the agreeableness spectrum. And because of that, I'm a very, or related to that, I would describe myself as a very high empathy individual. And for those who are listening today, if you identify the same way, you know that it's very draining. The empathy can be a strength in many situations because you understand others, you can relate to them, you probably form relationships and bonds more quickly than those who don't. They take, generally speaking, longer to develop those bonds. And again, doesn't mean they can't do it, but they have to do it in different ways. But the shadow side is it's very draining. We see this often in professions like doctor, more nurse than doctor, actually.
Yeah.
Nursing, teachers that constantly have to be on, that care so much about their students. I don't know how it is in the UK, but it's hard to find in the US a teacher that has been teaching, especially young children, for more than 5 to 7 years nowadays, because it's so easy for them to burn out. It's so hard for them to keep up that level of empathy. And so, first of all, identifying that about yourself. Now you can look for ways to set boundaries. It may be, if you're in the corporate world, it may be not scheduling meetings back to back because of how draining they can be on you, because you're feeling the emotions of others when you're in those meetings. It can be delegating certain work if you're a leader. You want to have a certain level of involvement with all your direct reports, but there may be certain things that you can delegate help for them or training for them. It doesn't always have to be you. And so these are the kind of techniques when you realize that you're a very high empathy individual and that the more you give yourself, the more it's going to drain you, kind of picking and choosing where you're going to direct that empathy, because you can't turn it on and off. If you're with a person, you're going to feel it, and it's going to be draining after a certain amount of time. Now, where are you on the, what about those that are on the opposite end? If you find it hard, and I find that many who are on the opposite end don't realize they're on the opposite end, but it comes out, and working with a coach like you, Georgie, it comes out that I don't understand what's wrong with these people. What's the problem here? Why can't they see this? Okay, well, now they're lacking empathy, because even if it's hard for us to be able to relate to how a person responds in a certain situation, let's make it more concrete. Why are they struggling so much with this problem, with giving this presentation? Giving presentations is easy. Okay, maybe it is for you, but for them it's different. So what's your problem? What really challenges and overwhelms you? That's what you have to relate to. You don't think about what they're struggling with and how easy that is. You think about, okay, they're struggling with this. What do I really struggle with? Oh, well, I really struggle with when my spouse is sick and I still have to do this, this, and this. Okay, that feeling, relate that to the feeling they're dealing with as they develop this presentation. And now you can start to build empathy. So it's recognizing kind of where you are on the spectrum of empathy, which takes time, but then using different techniques now to bridge those gaps or to keep your empathy in balance. For if you have so much empathy, then setting your boundaries. If you find that you lack empathy, finding ways to build it and to exercise that empathy muscle, so to speak.
So it goes back again to that self-awareness. First of all, like that emotional intelligent empathy, recognizing where you are. There's a continuum. We're not all at the same place. And using different techniques to bridge that gap. And I love what you said there about, because people will all have our own challenges. Maybe for one person it's speaking on a panel or doing a presentation. Others are much more comfortable with that. So there's a judgment, and as human beings, we're very judgmental. But you'll have your own struggles and challenges in other areas. So understanding what that feels like for you and recognizing, that person will be feeling a similar emotion in that situation.
Exactly. And so let's go back to empathy for a second. That's not the end of the world. Oh, I discover I never knew this. I lack empathy. This is horrible. How can I be a good leader if I lack empathy? No, this is actually, it can be a strong point in certain situations, because the leaders that lack empathy, at least in certain situations, they find it easier to push people out of their comfort zone, which to an extent is good.
It's a good
thing,
yes.
Exactly, because for us very high empathy individuals, it's very hard for me to push someone out of their comfort zone. I'll just I don't want to make them do this. It's fine like that. And then they never grow unless I push myself to push them. So again, it's not good or bad. These personality traits are going to have pros and cons. They're not all personality traits, but these traits about our personality, maybe that's a better way to describe them, are all going to have pros and cons. Like you said, Jordy, self-awareness, recognizing where you are so that you can leverage the strength and mitigate the weakness.
And when when I work with leadership teams, I always speak about the importance of cognitive diversity. You don't want to be in an echo chamber.
Right.
And I've always thought about diversity in many different aspects. And I hadn't really thought about it in the sense of how you shared there about personality traits. Because someone, if they're lower on the empathy, they'll likely push you outside your comfort zone. That's a good thing. So it's diversity across across many different pillars here. You talked about setting boundaries. I am somebody I'm a people pleaser. I've struggled to say no to things in the past. Any advice you can give on how to say no elegantly?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of tools we've used in the past. One of them is first identifying why you want to say no. Because for someone, I'm the same, by the way. So for someone like you and me, Georgie, it's hard for us to say no because we want to build the relationship. We're high in the agreeableness spectrum, probably, meaning that we value social harmony. We value the relationship. So identifying that we need to say no things. Number one, yes, for our own boundaries. Number two, I like asking myself the question, if I say yes to this, what am I saying no to? Because you're saying no to something. If you don't say no to this, you're saying no to something else that you may want to do instead of this, or that's going to fall through the cracks at the expense of this. So recognizing that first, that you're always saying no. It's just if you're falling into saying yes to things that you don't really want to say yes to, then you're saying no to bigger things that you may not want to say no to. So that's the first step. The second step, and I learned this from a psychologist, Dr. Nicole LaPera, and she has this formula. Now, let me see if I'm going to get it right. I believe it goes like this: the no, the appreciation, and the well wishes. And I might be getting that backwards.
Okay.
I can link you to, because I've written about this before too, but I haven't used that in a while because I've gotten better at saying no to things. But basically, it's being direct, not apologizing. We're not sorry that we can't do this because we just can't. But appreciation. Thank you so much for thinking of me for this. Thank you for asking me about this. I can't do it because you'll always have to say because. I can't do it right now. I can't manage this right now. Depending on the level of the relationship, if it is someone we really care about or a relationship we want to nurture, we might explain why. I can't do it because of XYZ. But I wish you the best with this. I know you're going to find the right fit for this, et cetera, et cetera. And just having that little formula. I used to keep the formula on my desktop or easy to access. And when I had to respond to no to things, I would use it, And then, like I said, practice doesn't make perfect. I don't believe practice makes perfect. Practice makes better. And so as you continue to practice it, then you get better at it and it becomes second nature after a while.
Well, that's another maxim. Practice makes better because perfection doesn't exist. So I love that. Practice makes better, but no appreciation, well wishes. Okay, I'm going to have a post-it note of that on my PC. And when you speak about boundaries, no is a choice, isn't it? No is a choice. It's honoring ourselves. And yes, it's a magnitude of commitment. And it's interesting with some of the female leaders I work with, they're time poor because there's a paucity of time. They're working, they're busy, often many of them busy parents. Yet they'll be the ones that'll say, yes, I'll do the committee, school committee, because they feel they should. It's an important that no is a choice and yes is a magnitude of commitment. And it's okay to honor ourselves. And that's not being selfish, it's being selfist. It's making sure we're protecting our space and our time, which are some of our, they're non-renewable resources.
Exactly. And again, it just goes back to being thoughtful, making intentional decisions, because if we've gotten into that habit over the course of years, it's really hard to change, right? But some of these tools, asking these questions, embracing that pause, can help us now to slow down and make a decision that we're not going to regret later. Because what's worse than saying, okay, yeah, I'm going to lead that committee, and then the night before, something big at work, but the school function is the next day, and now you're committed to both. Now you have to say no to one of them, right? And then that's going to bring more emotional stress, and it's going to affect your emotional energy. So again, it goes back to being thoughtful and intentional. It's going to help you to make decisions that are more in line with your values. Another phrase that I love: never make a permanent decision based on a temporary emotion.
Yeah.
We're stuck in that moment. Oh, I don't want to say no. Oh, someone needs to do this and it should be me. Say yes. And then we regret it for the next 6 months to 6 to 12 months, So try to find ways using these tools to embrace that pause and make more thoughtful, intentional decisions that we don't regret later.
That's so important. Never make a permanent decision on a temporary emotion, because our emotions are fleeting, and they can feel very, when we're triggered, it can be good emotions, and equally there can be, we're frustrated, we're angry, we become irrational, like that. People aren't going to see the best versions of us, so we're not going to be putting our best foot forward. And when it comes to emotional intelligence, that there's such a wide ranging of skills, from impulse control to reality testing to empathy. In your experience, if you were to advise leaders, or what is the one, the one aspect of emotional intelligence for them to work on that could have the greatest impact, have that amplification impact, what would you tell them?
So before I answer that, this is you gave me pause when I read this question. So elaborate a little bit on what you mean by reality testing, because I found that I hadn't heard that expression before.
So reality testing, what does that mean to me? I suppose I think of it like emotionally hijacking. Are we seeing things in a rational and logical place, or are we seeing things from that emotional place? And to me, if we're wearing glasses, there's a different lens there. So reality testing is being more, we're more looking at data. We're coming from a place of logic rather than emotion.
Got it. Got it. I love that. Okay. So I did give some thought to this, and it's a hard question to answer because, like I said, it's so wide spanning. Emotional intelligence is almost everything, right? So, but I think empathy is really, in my experience, as I look at leaders especially, I think this is the one that really needs to be worked on and brought into balance. And it goes back to several different things we've said in the course of this conversation. It goes back to that self-awareness is also connected to empathy because we can't fully understand the impact and the impact we have on others and the perception others have of us unless we also have that empathy. Now, it goes back to what we said a few minutes ago, or maybe we're lacking that empathy and we have no idea how our words are coming off. We have no idea, going back to the Michael Jordan example, that by tweaking not what we say, but how we say it, how we deliver it, going back to the feedback portion of this conversation. And you can see how many times empathy plays a role or has a bearing on all these different aspects of emotional intelligence. So if I had to pick one, I'd say that's one to really work on. And I'd say that also influences the others. It influences your impulse control because if you can have empathy and know that if you say this in this way, it's going to land in this way and it's going to affect your relationship in that way, then you're going to work harder at controlling the impulse and pausing before you say something or changing the way you say it. And it's going back to reality testing, perception. It's going to affect that as well. So they're all important, but if I had to pick one, I would say start with empathy.
I love that. And you mentioned how emotional intelligence is wide spanning. How do you see the role of emotional intelligence evolving in leadership over the next, over the next decade?
Okay, well, we're living in the age of AI, right? It's a very interesting time because this is a nascent technology that's just exploding. I don't think the internet exploded as quickly as this has. And so it's changing everything, not just on a daily basis, like almost, it seems sometimes like an hourly basis, right? And people are using AI as therapists and people are using AI to hone their written communication and this and that. And I just read a headline or an article recently that companies are going more old school with their interview process and starting to change their processes because people are using AI to complete all the exercises and essays and all this. And then they're coming in the interview process and they're seeing a completely different person. So they're trying to integrate the interview process earlier on. So all that considered, AI changing everything. I think emotional intelligence is only going to increase in importance because when you can, first of all, you can use AI to help develop your emotional intelligence and to kind of identify some of those blind spots. So that's one thing. But as people use these AI tools more, they're going to lack that genuine emotional connection because AI can imitate emotional connection, but it can't replace it. That's one thing AI can't do. So I think a leader and just even team members' ability to relate to other people on an emotional level, to be able to self-regulate, there's one other that I thought of. And also things like this, where you're having real conversation. I've been hearing more recently AI podcast episodes where it's two AIs actually speaking to each other, right? So that's just going to increase the value of genuine conversations like this, genuine one-to-one connection between people at work, community building, whether it be in the workplace or outside of the workplace. All those things I think are going to grow exponentially in importance in the same way AI has grown exponentially in these last few years.
I completely agree with you. And I think that human leadership becomes a competitive advantage. I really do. And it's interesting. I hadn't heard that some interviews are going back to old school, but that makes perfect sense because to your point, AI can imitate, but it can't replace that human connection and it can't replace how I feel in this conversation. And
Exactly.
So it is going to be an interesting one to watch. And I also look at leadership teams and those that are high performing leadership teams, trust is underpinning that team. And that comes from that social connection and, building that psychological safety because your actions, your behavior, how you say things and how you make that other person feel. So it is going to be interesting. Now, look, this has been whenever we speak, I come away making copious notes. And you are so energizing. I always leave feeling up levels, lighter, and just more elevated. And How could people learn more about you? I mean, EQ Applied is a book, as I said, I will keep telling everyone about this book because it is my Bible, or one of my Bibles. But how can people learn more about your work?
So I have a website of the same name, EQ Applied. So just search EQ Applied, you'll find it. We have tons of free resources and tools available there. For those that are willing to go a little bit deeper, the newest big thing, which is I'm going all in, is building my own emotional intelligence community. And we're targeting leaders, those that are building the culture at work. So they're not just developing emotional intelligence for themselves, but they're developing it in their teams, and they want a structured way to do that. And then emotional intelligence coaches like myself that are helping others. Tons of tools that make their job easier. It's called the Lighthouse, and very symbolic.
Yes.
The guiding light for leaders and change makers at work. It's a beacon. It's something that not only can give you leaders guidance, but you leaders become a part of that community. And that's the biggest thing since I started this just 4 or 5 months ago. I'm learning so much from the ones in the community, and we're learning from each other. And it's this peer-to-peer learning that I didn't necessarily anticipate, but I love. And so the members themselves are beacons of emotional intelligence. So check out the Lighthouse. I think that would be something those in your community might be especially interested in. But yeah, check out EQ Applied. Hopefully there's something there that they will find useful and helpful for them in their emotional intelligence journey.
And with the Lighthouse, is that on the EQ Applied website, or how can people find out more about that?
Yeah,
okay.
so it's a tab right there on the website. And it explains everything there. It's a work in progress because I just started it 5 months ago. So it's learning, evolving. I think I'm going to, go up another level and filming some new videos. But what's there will give them a really good feeling for what they'll get if they join.
And I want to just circle back to what I said at the beginning with the book. When I read your work, it's so tactical. And that's to me what differentiates your work. There's other books that are very theoretical, which is great. It's important to understand the theory. People want to understand the how to. And this book, you can open it on a single page and you take something valuable away. I mean, some people want to read it front to back. Others want to just dive into certain chapters. So yes, it's a great read. Thank you, Justin. It has been such a wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Georgie. It always is. And anytime you're available, I'm available too, because I would love to continue the conversation.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you too. This is awesome.
If you want to see the full episode, please do look at Apple and Spotify under Stratospheric Leaders, or go to YouTube where it will be under Georgie Dickens. I hope you enjoyed the full episode. There are so many great sound bites shared.